Chapter 15 of Edison, His Life and Inventions. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nellie. Edison, His Life and Inventions by Frank Louis Dyer and Thomas Comerford Martin. Chapter 15. Introduction of the Edison electric light. In the previous chapter on the invention of a system, the narrative has been carried along for several years of activity after the verge of successful and commercial application of Edison's ideas and devices for incandescent electric lighting. The story of any 1 year in this period, if treated chronologically, would branch off in a great many directions, some going back to early works, others forward to arts not within the general survey. And the effect of such treatment will be confusing. In like manner, the development of the Edison lighting system follows several concurrent, simultaneous lines of events, and an effort was therefore made in the last chapter to give a rapid glance over the whole movement, embracing a term of near 5 years, and including in its scope both the old world and the new. What is necessary to the completeness of the story at this stage is not to recapitulate, but to take up some of the loose ends of the threads, woven in and follow them through until the clear and comprehensive picture of the events can be seen. Some things it would be difficult to reproduce in any picture of the art and times. One of the greatest delusions of the public in regard to any notable invention is to believe that the world is waiting for it with open arms and eager welcome. The exact contrary is the truth. There is not a single new art or device the world has ever enjoyed of which it can be said that it was given immediate enthusiastic reception. The way of the inventor is hard. He can sometimes raise capital to help him in working out his crude conceptions, but even then it is frequently done at a distressful cost of personal surrender. When the result is achieved, the invention makes its appeal on the score of economy of material or of effort, and then labor often waits with crushing and tyrannical spirit to smash the apparatus or forbid its very use. Where both capital and labor are agreed that the object is worthy of encouragement, there is the superior indifference of the public to overcome, and the stubborn resistance of the pre-existing devices to combat. The years of hardship and struggle are thus prolonged. The tar-green poverty and neglect too frequently embitters the inventor's scanty bread, and one great spirit after another has succumbed to the defeat beyond which lay the procrastinated triumph, so dearly earned. Even in America, where the adoption of improvements and innovations is regarded as so prompt and sure, and where the huge tours of the patent office and the courts bear witness to the ceaseless efforts of the inventor, it is impossible to deny that the sad truth that, unconsciously, society discourages invention rather than invites it. Possibly, our national optimism, as revealed in invention, the seeking a higher good, needs some check. Possibly, the leaders would travel too fast and too far on the road to perfection if conservatism did not also play its salutary part in insisting that the procession move forward as a whole. Edison and his electric light were happily more fortunate than other men and inventions in the relative cordiality of the reception given them. The merit was too obvious to remain unrecognized. Nevertheless, it was through intense hostility and opposition that the young art made its way, pushed forward by Edison's strong personality and by his unbounded, unwavering faith in the ultimate success of his system. It may seem strange that great effort was required to introduce a light so manifestly inconvenient, safe, agreeable, and advantageous, but the facts are a matter of record, and today the recollection of some of the episodes brings a fierce glitter into the eye and keen indignation into the voice of the man who has come so victoriously through the door. It was not a fact at any time that the public was opposed to the idea of the electric light. On the contrary, the conditions for its acceptance had been ripening fast. Yet the very vogue of the electric arc light made harder the arrival of the incandescent. As a new illuminant for the streets, the arc became familiar, either as a direct substitute for the low gas lamp along the sidewalk curb, or as a novel form of moonlight raised in groups at the top of lofty towers often 150 feet high. Some of these lights were already in use for large indoor spaces, although the size of the unit, the deadly pressure of the current, and the sputtering sparks from the carbons made them highly objectionable for such purposes. A number of parent arc lighting companies were in existence, and a great many local companies had been called into being under franchise for commercial business, and to execute regular city contracts for the street lighting. In this manner, a great deal of capital and the energies of many prominent men in politics and business have been rallied distinctively to support of arc lighting. Under the inventive leaderships of such brilliant men as Bruce, Thomson, Weston, and Van Depoeler, there were scores of others. The industry had made considerable progress, and the art has been firmly established. Here lurked, however, very rigorous elements of opposition, for Edison predicted from the start the superiority of the small electric unit of light, and devoted himself exclusively to its perfection and introduction. It can be readily seen that this situation made it all the more difficult for Edison's system to secure the large sums of money needed for its exploitation, and to obtain new franchises of city ordinance as a public utility. Thus, in a curious manner, the modern art of electric lighting was in a very true sense divided against itself, with intense rivalries and jealousies which were none the less real, because they were but temporary and occurred in fact where ultimate union of the force was inevitable. For a long period of time, the arc was dominant and superior in the lighting branch of the electric industries in all respects, whether as to investment, employees, income, and profits, or in the respect to the manufacturing side. When the great National Electric Light Association was formed in 1885, its organizers were the captains of arc lighting, and not a single Edison company or licensee could be found in its ranks, or dare to solicit membership. The Edison company, soon numbering about 300, formed their own association, still maintained as a separate and useful body, and the lines were tensely drawn in a way that made it none too easy for the Edison service to advance, or for an impartial man to remain friendly with both sides. But the growing popularity of incandescent lighting, the flexibility and safety of the system, the ease with which other electric devices for heat, power, etc., could be put indiscriminately on the same circuits with the lamps, in due course rendered the old attitude of opposition obviously foolish and unattainable. The United States Census Office statistics of 1902 show that the income from incandescent lighting by central stations had by that time become over 52% of the total, while that from arc lighting was less than 29%, and electric power surfaced due to the ease with which models could be introduced on incandescent circuits brought in 15% more. Hence, 20 years after the first Edison station were established, the methods they involved could be fairly credited with no less than 67% of all central station income in the country, and the proportion has grown ever since then. It will be readily understood that, under these conditions, the modern lighting company supplies to its customers both incandescent and arc lighting, frequently from the same dynamo electric machinery as a source of current, and that the old feud as between the rival systems has died out. In fact, for some years past, the presidents of the National Electric Light Association have been chosen almost exclusively from among the managers of the great Edison lighting companies in the leading cities. The other strong opposition to the incandescent light came from the gas industry. There also the most bitter feeling was shown. The gas manager did not like arc light, but it interfered only with his street service, which was not his largest source of income by any means. What did arouse his ire and indignation was to find this new opponent, the little incandescent lamp, pushing boldly into the field of interior lighting, claiming it on a great variety of grounds of superiority, and calmly ignoring the question of price because it was so much better. Newspaper records and the pages of the technical papers of the day show to what extent prejudice and passion were stirred up, and the astounding degree to which the opposition to the new light was carried. Here again was given the most convincing demonstration of the truth that such an addition to the resources of mankind always carries with it unsuspected benefits, even for its enemies. In two distinct directions, the gas art was immediately helped by Edison's work. The competition was almost salutary in the stimulus it gave to improvements in processes for making, distributing, and using gas, so that while vast economies have been effected at the gas works, the customers has had infinitely better light for less money. In the second place, the coming of the incandescent light raised the standard of illumination in such a manner that more gas than ever was wanted in order to satisfy the popular demand for brightness and brilliancy, both indoors and on the street. The result of the operation of these two forces acting upon it, wholly from without, and from a rival it was desired to crush, has been to increase enormously the production and use of the gas in the last 25 years. It is true that the income of the Central Station is now over $300 million a year, and that isolated plant lighting represents also a large amount of diverted business. But, just as shown, it would obviously be unfair to regard all this as allures from the standpoint of gas. It is, in a great measure, due to new sources of income developed by electricity for itself. A retrospective survey shows that, had the men in control of the American gas lighting art in 1880 been sufficiently far-sighted, and had they not taken a broader view of the situation, they might easily have remained dominant in the whole field of artificial lighting, by securing the ownership of the patents and devices of the new industry. Apparently, not a single step of that kind was undertaken. No probably was there a gas manager who would have agreed with Edison in the opinion written down by him at the time in Little Notebook number 184, that gas products were having conferred on them an enhanced earning capacity. It was doubtless fortunate and providential for the electric lighting art that, in its state of immature development, it did not fall into hands of men who were opposed to its growth, and would not have sought its technical perfection. It was allowed to carve out its own career, and thus escaped the fate that is supposed to have attended other great inventions, of being bought up merely for purposes of suppression. There is a vague popular notion that this happens to the public lawyers, but the truth is that no discovery of any real value is ever entirely lost. It may be retarded, but that is all. In the case of the gas companies and the incandescent light, many of them to whom it was in the early days as great an irritant as a red flag to a bow, emulated the performance of that animal, and spent a great deal of money and energy in billowing and throwing up dirt in the effort to destroy the hated enemy. This was not long nor universally the spirit shown, and today, in hundreds of cities, the electric and gas products are united under the one management, which does not find it impossible to push in a friendly and progressive way the use of both illuminants. The most conspicuous example of this identity of interest is given in New York itself. So much for the early opposition, of which there was plenty. But it may be questioned whether inertia is not equally to be dreaded with active ill will. Nothing is more difficult in the world than to get a good many hundreds of thousands or millions of people to do something they have never done before. A very real difficulty in the introduction of his lamp and lighting system by Edison lay in the absolute ignorance of the public at large, not only as to its merits, but as to the very appearance of the light. Some few thousand people had gone out to Menlo Park, and had there seen the lamps in operation at the laboratory or on the hillsides, but they were an insignificant proportion of the inhabitants of the United States. Of course, a great many accounts were written and read, but while genuine interest was aroused, it was necessarily apathetic. A newspaper description of a magazine article may be admirably complete in itself, with illustrations, but until some personal experience is had of the thing described, it does not convey a perfect mental picture, nor can it always make the desire active and insistent. Generally, people wait to have the new thing brought to them, and hence, as in the case of the Edison light, an educational campaign of a practical nature is a fundamental condition of success. After a serious difficulty confronting Edison and his associates was that nowhere in the world were there to be purchased any of the appliances necessary for the use of lighting system. Edison has resolved from the very first that the initial central station embodying his various ideas should be installed in New York City, where he could superintend the installation personally and then watch the operation. Plans to that end were now rapidly maturing, but there would be needed, among many other things, every one of them new and novel, dynamos, switchboards, regulators, pressure and current indicators, fixture in great variety, incandescent lamp, meters, sockets, small switches, underground conductors, junction boxes, service boxes, manhole boxes, connectors, and even specially made wire. Now, not one of these marvelous things were in existence. Not any outsider was sufficiently informed about such devices to make them in order, except perhaps the special wire. Edison therefore started the first of all a lamp factory in one of the buildings in Menlo Park, equipped it with novel machinery and apparatus, and began to instruct men, boys and girls, as they could be enlisted, in the absolutely new art, putting Mr. Upton in charge. With regard to the condition attendant upon the manufacture of the lamps, Edison says, "When we first started the electric light, we had to have a factory for manufacturing lamps. As the Edison Light Company did not seem disposed to go into manufacturing, we started a small lamp factory in Menlo Park, with what money I could raise from my other inventions or royalties, and some assistance. The lamps at that time were costing about $1.25 each to make. So I said to the company, 'If you will give me a contract during the life of the patents, I will make all the lamps required by the company and deliver them for 40 cents. The company jumped at the chance of this offer, and a contract was drawn up. We then bought at a receiver's sale at Harrison, New Jersey, a very large brick factory building which had been used as an oil-cloth works. We got it at a great bargain, and only paid a small sum down, and the balance to mortgage. We moved the lamp works from Menlo Park to Harrison. The first year, lamps cost us about $1.10 each. We sold them for 40 cents, but there were only about 20 or 30,000 of them. The next year, they cost us about 70 cents, and we sold them for 40 cents. There were a good many, and we lost more money the second year than in the first. The third year, I succeeded in getting our machinery and in changing processes until it got down so that it cost somewhere around 50 cents. I still sold them for 40 cents, and lost more money that year than any other because the sales were increasingly rapidly. The fourth year, I got it down to 37 cents, and I made all the money up in 1 year that I had lost previously. I finally got it down to 22 cents, and sold them for 40 cents, and they were made by the million. Whereupon the Wall Street people thought it was a very lucrative business, so they concluded that they would like to have it, and bought us out. One of the incidents which caused a very great cheapening was that, when we started, one of the important processes had to be done by experts. This was the selling of the part carrying the filament into the globe, which was rather a delicate operation in those days, and required several months of training before anyone could sell a fair number of parts in a day. When we got to the point where we employed 80 of these experts, they formed a union, and knowing it was impossible to manufacture lamps without them, they became very insolent. One instance was that the son of one of these experts was employed in the office, and when he was told to do anything, would not do it, and or would give an insolent reply. He was discharged, whereupon the union notified us that, unless the boy was taken back, the whole body would go out. It got so bad that the manager came to me and said he could not stand any longer. Something had got to be done. They were not only more surly, they were diminishing the output, and it became impossible to manage the works. He got me enthused on the subject, so I started in to see if it were not possible to do that operation by machinery. After feeling around for some days, I got a clue how to do it. I then put men on it I could trust, and made the preliminary machinery. It seemed to work pretty well. I then made another machine which did the work nicely, and then made a third machine, and would bring in yardmen, ordinary laborers, etc., and when I could get these men to put the parts together, as well as the trained experts, in an hour, I considered the machine complete. I then went secretly to work, and made 30 of the machines. Up in the top loft of the factory, we stored these machines, and at night we put up the benches and got everything all ready. Then we discharged the office boy. Then the union went out. It has been out ever since. When we formed the works at Harrison, we divided the interest into 100 shares or parts at $100 par. One of the boys were hard up at the time, and sold 2 shares to Bob Cutting. Up to that time, we had never paid anything, but we got around to the point where the board declared a dividend every Saturday night. We had never declared a dividend when Cutting bought his shares, and after getting his dividends for 3 weeks in succession, I called up on the telephone and wanted to know what kind of a concern this was that paid a weekly dividend. The work sold for $1,085,000. Incidentally, it may be noted, as illustrative of the problem brought to Edison, that while he had the factory at Harrison, an importer and a Chinese trader went to him and wanted a dynamo to be run by hand power. The importer explained that in China, human labor was cheaper than steam power. Edison devised a machine to answer the purpose and put long spokes on it, fitted it up, and shipped it to China. He has not, however, heard of it since. For making the dynamos, Edison secured, as noted in the preceding chapter, the Roach Iron Works on Goldwork Street, New York, and this was also equipped. A building was rented on Washington Street, where machinery tours were put in specially designed for making the underground tube conductor and the various paraphernalia. And the faithful John Cruiasy was given charge of that branch of production. To Sigmund Bergman, who had worked previously with Edison on telephone apparatus and phonographs, and was already making Edison specialities in a small way in a loft on Wooster Street, New York, was assigned the task of constructing sockets, fixtures, meters, safety fuses, and numerous other details. Thus, broadly, the manufacturing end of the problem of introduction was carried off. In the early part of 1881, the Edison Electric Light Company leased the old Bischoff mansion at 65 Fifth Avenue, close to 14th Street, for its headquarters and showrooms. This was one of the finest homes in the city of that period, and its acquisition was a premonitory sign of the surrender of the famous Residential Avenue to commerce. The company needed not only offices, but even more, such as an interior as would display to advantage the new light in everyday use, and this house, with its liberal lines, spacious halls, lofty salons, wide parlors, and graceful winding stairway, was ideal for the purpose. In fact, in undergoing this violent change, it did not cease to be a home in the real sense, for to this day, many an Edison veteran's pulse is quickened by some chance reference to 65, where through many years the work of development by a loyal and devoted band of workers was centered. Here, Edison and a few of his assistants from Menlo Park installed immediately in the basement a small generating plant, at first with a gas engine, which was not successful, and then with a Hampson high-speed engine and boiler, constituting a complete isolated plant. The building was wired from top to bottom, and equipped with all the appliances of the art. The experience with the little gas engine was rather startling. At an early period of 65, we decided, says Edison, to light it up with the Edison system, and put a gas engine in the cellar, using city gas. One day it was not going very well, and I went down to the man in charge and got exploring around. Finally, I opened the pedestal, a storehouse for tools, etc. We had an open lamp, and when we opened the pedestal, it blew the doors off and blew out the windows and knocked me down and the other man. For the next 4 or 5 years, 65 was a veritable beehive, day and night. The routine was very much the same as that at the laboratory, in its utter neglect of the clock. The evenings were not only devoted to the continuance of the regular business, but the house were thrown open to the public until late at night, never closing before 10 o'clock, so as to give everybody who wished an opportunity to see that great novelty of the time, the incandescent light, whose fame had meanwhile been spreading all over the globe. The first year, 1881, was naturally that which witnessed the greatest rush of visitors, and the building hardly ever closed its doors till midnight. During the day business was carried on the great stress, and Mr. Inzau has described how Edison was to be found there trying to lead a life of a man of affairs in the conventional garb of polite society, instead of pursuing inventions and researches in his laboratory. But the disagreeable ordeal could not be dodged. After the experience, Edison could never again be tempted to quit his laboratory and work for any length of time. But in this instance, there were some advantages attached to the sacrifice, for the crowds of lion hunters and people seeking business arrangements would only have gone out to Menlo Park, while, on the other hand, the great plans of light in New York demanded very close personal attention on the spot. As he urged, not only Edison but all the company's directors, officers, and employees were kept busy exhibiting and explaining light. To the public of that day, when the highest known form of the house illuminant was gas, the incandescent lamp, with its ability to burn in any position, its lack of heat so that you can put your hand on the brilliant glass globe, the absence of any vitiating effect on the atmosphere, the obvious safety from fire, the curious fact that you needed no matches to light it, and that it was under absolute control from a distance. These and many other features came as a distinct revelation and marvel, while promising so much additional comfort, convenience, and beauty in the house, that inspection was almost invariably followed by request for installation. The camaraderie that existed at this time was very democratic, for all were workers in a common cause. All were enthusiastic believers in the doctrine they proclaimed, and hoped to profit by the opening up of the new art. Often at night, in the small hours, all would adjourn for refreshments to a famous resort nearby, and to discuss the events of the today and tomorrow, full of instant excitement. The easy relationship of the time is neatly sketched by Edison in humorous complaint as to his inability to keep his own secrets. When at 65, I used to have in my desk a box of cigarettes. I would go to the box 4 or 5 times a day to get a cigarette. After it got circulated about the building, everybody would come to get my cigarettes, so the box would only last about a day and a half. I was telling a gentleman one day that I could not keep a secret. Even if I locked them up in my desk, they would break it open. He suggested to me that he had a friend over on 8th Avenue who made a superior grade of cigarettes, and who would show them a trick. He said that he would have some of them made up with hair and old paper, and I could put them in without a word and see the result. I thought no more about the matter. He came in 2 or 3 months after and said, "How did that cigarette business work?" I didn't remember anything about it, and coming to investigate, it appeared that the box of cigarettes had been delivered and had been put in my desk, and I had smoked them all. I was too busy on other things to notice. It was not uncommon sight to see in the parlors in the evening of John Pierre Morgan, Norman Brain, Grosvenor P. Laurie, Henry Wheeler, Robert L. Cotton, Edward D. Adams, J. Hood Wright, E. G. Fabry, Armand Galloway, and other men prominent in the city life, many of them stockholders and directors, all interested in doing this educational work. Thousands of persons thus came, bankers, brokers, lawyers, editors, and reporters, prominent businessmen, electricians, insurance experts, under whose searching and intelligent inquiries the fact was elicited, and general admiration was soon won for the system, which in advance had solved so many new problems. Edison himself was in universal request, and the subject of much adulation, but altogether too busy and modest to be spoiled by it. Once in a while he felt in his duty to go over the ground with scientific visitors, many of whom were formed abroad, and discuss questions which were not simply those of technique, but related to newer phenomena, such as the action of carbon, the nature and effect of high vacuum, the principles of electrical subdivision, the value of insulation, and many others which, unfortunate to say, remain as esoteric now as they were then, even fruitful themes of controversy. Speaking of those days of nights, Edison says, "Years ago, one of the great violinists was Ramani. After his performances were over, he used to come down to 65 and talk economics, philosophy, moral science, and everything else. He was highly educated and had a great mental capacity. He would talk with me, but I never asked him to bring his violin. One night he came with his violin, about 12 o'clock. I had a library at the top of the house, and Ramani came up there. He was in a genial humor, and played the violin for me for about 2 hours, $2,000 worth. The front door were closed, and he walked up and down the room as he played. After that, every time he came to New York, he used to call at 65 late at night with his violin. If we were not there, he would come down to the slums on Gower Street, and would play for an hour or two and talk philosophy. I would talk for the benefit of his music. Henry E. Dixie, then at the height of his Adonis popularity, would come in those days, after theater hours, and would entertain us with stories. 1882 to 1884. Another visitor who used to give us a good deal of amusement and pleasure was Captain Shaw, the head of London Fire Brigade. He was good company. He would go out among the fire ladies and have a great time. One time Robert Lincoln, ensign stager of the Western Union, interested in the electric light, came on to make some arrangement with Major Eaton, president of the Edison Electric Light Company. They came to 65 in the afternoon, and Lincoln commenced telling stories, like his father. They told stories all the afternoon, and that night they left for Chicago. When they got to Cleveland, it dawned upon them that they had not done any business, so they had to come back on the next train to New York and transact it. They were interested in the Chicago Edison Company, now one of the largest of the systems in the world. Speaking of telling stories, I once got telling a man stories at the Harrisonland factory, in the yard as he was leaving. It was winter, and he was all in furs. I had nothing on to protect me against the cold. I told him one story after the other, 6 of all. Then I got pleurisy and had to be shipped to Florida for cure. The organization of the Edison Electric Light Company went back to 1868, but after the time of leasing 65 Fifth Avenue, he had not been engaged in actual business. He had merely enjoyed the delights of anxious anticipation and the perilous pleasure of backing Edison's experiments. Now active exploitation was required. Dr. Norman Green, the well-known president of the Western Union Telegraph Company, was president also of the Edison Company, but the present nature of his regular duties left him no leisure for such close responsible management as was now required. Early in 1881, Mr. Grosvenor P. Lowry, after consultation with Mr. Edison, prevailed upon Major S. B. Eaton, the leading member of a very prominent law firm in New York, to accept the position of vice president and general manager of the company, in which, as also in some of the subsidiary Edison companies, and as president he continued actively and energetically for nearly 4 years, a critical formative period in which the solidity of the foundation laid is attested by the magnitude and splendor of the superstructure. The fact that Edison conferred at this point with Mr. Lowry should perhaps be explained in justice to the distinguished lawyer, who for so many years was the close friend of the inventor, and the chief counsel in all the tremendous litigation that followed the effort to enforce and validate Edison patents. As in England, Mr. Edison was fortunate in securing the legal assistance of Sir Richard Webster, afterward Lord Chief Justice of England, so in America it counted greatly in his favor to enjoy the advocacy of such men as Lowry. Prominent among the famous leaders of the New York bar, born in Massachusetts, Mr. Lorry, in his earlier days self-straitened circumstances, was accustomed to defray some portion of his educational expenses by teaching music in Berkshire villages, and by a curious coincidence, one of his pupils, F. L. Pope, later Edison's partner for a time. Lorry went west to Bleeding, Kansas, with the first governor Reeder, and both were active participants in the exciting scenes of the Free State War until driven away in 1856 by many other Free Soilers by the acts of the broader Ruffian legislature. Returning east, Mr. Lorry took up practice in New York, soon becoming eminent in his profession, and upon the accession of William Ogden to the presidency of the Western Union Telegraph Company in 1866, he was appointed its general counsel, the duties of which post he discharged for 15 years. One of the great cases in which he thus took a leading and distinguished art was that of the quadruplex telegraph, and later he acted as a legal adviser to Henry Villard in his numerous grandiose enterprises. Lorry thus came to know Edison, to conceive an intense admiration for him, and to believe in his ability at the time when others could not detect the fire of genius smoldering beneath the modest exterior of a gaunt young operator slowly finding himself. It will be seen that Mr. Lorry was in a peculiarly advantageous position to make his convictions about Edison felt, so that it was he and his friends who rallied quickly to the new dawn of discovery, and lent to the inventor the aid that came at a critical period. In this connection, it may be well to quote an article that appeared at the time of Mr. Lorry's death, in 1893. One of the most important services which Mr. Lorry has ever performed was in furnishing and procuring the necessary financial backing for Thomson A. Edison, and bringing out and perfecting his system of incandescent lighting. With characteristic pertinacity, Mr. Lorry stood by the inventor through thick and thin, in spite of doubt, discouragement, and ridicule, until at last success crowned his efforts, and all the litigation which had resulted from the widespread infringements of Edison patents. Mr. Lorry has ever borne the burden and heat of the day, and perhaps in no other field has he so personally distinguished himself as in the successful advocacy of the claims of Edison to the invention of the incandescent lamp and everything hereunto pertaining. This was the man of whom Edison had necessarily to make a confidant and adviser, and who supplied other things besides the legal direction and financial alliance by his knowledge of the world and of affairs. There were many vital things to be done in the exploitation of the system that Edison simply could not and would not do. But Lorry's savoir-faire, ready wit and humor, chivalry and devotion, graceful eloquence, and admirable equipoise of judgment were all the qualities that the occasion demanded, and that met the exigencies. We are indebted to Mr. Ingersoll for a graphic sketch of Edison at this period, and of the conditions under which work was done and progress was made. I do not think I had any understanding with Edison when I first went with him. As to my duties, I did whatever he told me, and looked after all kinds of affairs, from buying his clothes to financing his business. I used to open the correspondence and answer it all, sometimes signing Edison's name with my initial, and sometimes signing my own name. If the letter course were pursued, I was addressing a stranger, I would sign as Edison's private secretary. I had his power of attorney, and signed his checks. It was seldom that Edison signed a letter or check at that time. If he wanted personally to send a communication to anybody, if it was one of his close associates, it would probably be a pencil memo signed Edison. It was a shorthand writer. I seldom took down from Edison's dictation, unless it was one on some technical subject that I did not understand. I would go over the correspondence with Edison, sometimes making a marginal note in shorthand, and sometimes Edison would make his own notes on letters, and I would be expected to clear up the correspondence with Edison laconic comments as a guide as to the character of answer to make. It was a very common thing for Edison to write the words yes or no, and this would be all I had on which to base my answer. Edison marginalized documents extensively. He had a wonderful ability in pointing out the weak points of agreement or balance sheet, all the while protesting he was no lawyer or accountant, and his views were expressed in a very few words, but in characteristic and emphatic manner. The first few months I was with Edison, he spent most of the time in the office at 65 Fifth Avenue. Then there was a great deal of trouble with the light of lamps there, and he disappeared from the office and spent his time largely at Menlo Park. At another time there were a great deal of trouble with some of the details and construction of dynamos, and Edison spent a lot of time at Gower Street, which had been rapidly equipped with the idea of turning out bipolar dynamo electric machines, direct connected to the engine, the first of which went to Paris and London, while the next were installed in the old Pearl Street station of Edison Electric Illuminating Company of New York, just south of Fulton Street, and the west side of the street. Edison devoted a great deal of his time to the engineering work in connection with the laying out of the first incandescent electric lighting system in New York. Apparently at that time, between the end of 1881 and spring of 1882, the most serious work was the manufacture and installation of underground conductors in this territory. These conductors were manufactured by Electric Tube Company, which Edison controlled in a shop at 65 Washington Street, run by John Curiassi. Half-round copper conductors were used, kept in place relatively to each other, and in the tube, first of all by a heavy piece of cardboard, and later on by a rope, and then put in a 20-foot iron pipe, and a combination of acetone and linseed oil was forced into the pipe for insulation. I remember as a coincidence that the building was only 20 feet wide. These lengths of conductors were 20 feet 6 inches long, as the half-round coppers extended to 3 inches beyond the drag ends of the length of the pipe, and in one of the operations we used to take the length of tubing out of the window in order to turn it around. I was elected secretary of the Electric Tube Company, and was expected to look after its finances, and it was in this position that my long intimacy with John Curiassi started. At this juncture, a large part of the correspondence referred very naturally to electric lighting, embodying requests for all kinds of information, catalogs, prices, terms, etc., and all these letters were turned over to the lighting company by Edison for attention. The company was soon swamped with proposition for sale of territorial rights and with other negotiations, and some of these were accompanied by the offer of very large sums of money. It was the beginning of the electric light forward, which soon rose to sensational heights. Had the company accepted this cash offer from various localities, it could have gathered several millions of dollars at once in its treasury, but this was not at all in accord with Mr. Edison's idea, which was to prove by actual experience the commercial value of the system, and then to license a central station companies in large cities and towns, the parent company taking the percentage of their capital for the license under the Edison patents, and contracting also for the supply of apparatus, lamps, etc. This left the remainder of the country open for the cash sale of plants wherever requested. His counsels prevailed, and the wisdom of the policy adopted was seen in the swift establishment of Edison companies in centers of population both great and small, whose business has ever been a constant and growing source of income for the parent manufacturing interest. From first to last, Edison has been an exponent and advocate of the central station idea of distribution now so familiar to the public mind, but still very far from being carried out to its logical conclusions. In this instance, demands for isolated plants for lighting factories, mills, mines, hotels, etc., began to pour in, and something had to be done with them. This was a class of plant which the inquirers desired to purchase outright and operate themselves, usually because of remoteness for any possible source of general supply for Concord. It had not been Edison's intention to cater to this class of customer until his broad central station plan had been worked out, and he has also discouraged this isolated plant within the limits of urban circuits. But these demands were so insistent it could not be denied, and it was deemed desirable to comply with it at once, especially as it was seen that the steady call for supplies and renewals would benefit the new Edison manufacturing plants. After a very short trial, it was found necessary to create a separate organization for this branch of the industry, leaving the Edison Electric Light Company to continue under the original plan of operation as a parent, patent holding and licensing company. Accordingly, a new and distinct corporation was formed called the Edison Company for Isolated Lighting, to which was issued a special license to sell and operate plants of a self-contained character. As a matter of fact, Such work began in advance of almost every other kind. A small plant using the paper carbon filament lamps were furnished by Edison at the earnest solicitation of Mr. Henry Villard for the steamship Columbia in 1879, and it is amusing to note that Mr. Upton carried the lamps himself to the ship, very tenderly and jealously, like fresh eggs, a market garden basket. The installation was almost successful. Another pioneer plant was that equipped and started in January 1881 for Hinds and Ketchum, a new firm of lithographers and color printers, who had previously been able to work only by day, owing to the difficulties in coloring printing by artificial light. A year later they said, "It is the best substitute for daylight we have ever known, and almost as cheap." Mr. Edison himself described various instances in which the demands for isolated plants had to be met. One night at 65, he says, James Gordon Bennett came in. We were very anxious to get into a printing establishment. I had caused a printer's composing case to be set up with the idea that if we could get editors and publishers in to see it, we should show them the advantages of the electric light. So ultimately, Mr. Bennett came, and after seeing the whole operation of everything, he ordered Mr. Holland, general manager of the Herald, to light the newspaper office at once with electricity. Another instance of the same kind deals with the introduction of the light for purely social purposes. While at 65th Avenue, remarked Mr. Edison, I got to know Christian Hatter, then the largest decorator of the United States. He was a highly electoral man, and I loved to talk to him. He was always railing against the rich people for whom he did work, for their poor taste. One day Mr. W. H. Vanderbilt, who came to 65, saw the light and decided that he would have his new house lighted with it. This was one of the big box houses on Upper Fifth Avenue. He put the whole matter in the hands of his son-in-law, Mr. H. Mike Tombley, who was then in charge of the telephone department of the Western Union. Tombley closed the contract with us for a plant. Mr. Hurdle was doing the decoration, and it was extraordinarily fine. After a while we got the engines and boilers and wires all done, and the lights in position, before the house was quite finished, and thought we could have an exhibit of the light. About 8 o'clock in the evening we lit it up, and it was very good. Mr. Vanderbilt and his wife and some of his daughters came in, and were there a few minutes when the fire occurred. The large picture gallery was lined with silk cloth, interwoven with fine metallic thread. In some manner 2 wires had got crossed with this tinsel, which became red hot, and then the whole mass was soon afire. I knew what was the matter, and ordered them to run down and shut off. It had not burst into flame, and died out immediately. Mr. Vanderbilt became hysterical and wanted to know where it came from. We told her we had the plant in the cellar, and then she learned we had a boiler there. She said she would not occupy the house. She would not leave over a boiler. We had to take the whole installation out. The houses afterward went on to the New York Edison system. The art was, however, very crude and raw, and as there were no artisans in existence, as mechanics or electricians who had had any knowledge of the practice, there was inconceivable difficulty in getting such isolated plants installed, as well as wiring the buildings in the district to be covered by the first Central Station, New York. A night school was therefore founded at Fifth Avenue, and was put in charge of Mr. E. H. Johnson, fresh from his success in England. The most available men for the purpose were, of course, those who had been accustomed to wiring for the simpler electrical system then vulgar: telephones, district messengers' calls, burglar alarms, house annunciators, etc. And a number of these wire men were engaged and instructed patiently in the rudiments of the new arts by means of a blackboard and oral lessons. Students from the technical schools and colleges were also eager recruits, for here was something that promised a career, and one that was especially alluring to young youth because of its novelty. These beginners were also instructed in general engineering problems under the guidance of Mr. C. L. Clark, who was brought in from the Menlo Park laboratory to assume charge of the engineering part of the company's affairs. Many of these pioneer students and workmen became afterward large and successful contractors, or have held positions of distinction as managers and superintendents of central stations. Possibly the electrical industry may not now attract as much adventurous genius as it did then, for automobiles, aeronautics, and other new arts had come to the front in a quarter of a century to enlist an the enthusiasm of a young generation of mercurial spirits. But it is certain that at the period at which we write, Edison, himself still under 35, was the center of an extraordinary group of men, full of ever-rising and aspiring talent, to which he gave glorious opportunity. A very novel literary feature of the work was the issuance of a bulletin devoted entirely to the Edison lightning propaganda. Nowadays, the house organ, as it is called, has become a very hackneyed feature of industrial development, confusing in its variety and volume, and a somewhat doubtful adjunct to a highly perfected, widely circulating periodic panic press. But at that time, 1882, the bulletin of the Edison Electric Light Company, published in ordinary 12mo form, was distinctly new in advertising and possibly unique. As it is difficult to find anything that compared with it, the bulletin was carried on for some years, until its necessity was removed by the development of other opportunities for reaching the public, and its pages serve now as a vivid and lively picture of the period to which its record applies. The first issue of January 12, 1882, was only 4 pages, but it dealt with the question of insurance. Plants at San Diego, Chile, and Rio de Janeiro, and the European company with 3,500,000 francs described. The works in Paris, London, Strasbourg, and Moscow. The laying of over 6 miles street mains in New York, a patent decision in favor of Edison, and the size of the safety catch wire. By April of 1882, the bulletin had attained the respectable size of 16 pages, and in December it was a partly magazine for 48. Every item bears testimony to the rapid progress being made, and by the end of 1882, it is seen that no fewer than 153 isolated Edison plants have been started in the United States alone, with a capacity of 29,192 lamps. Moreover, the New York Central Station had gone into operation starting at 3 p.m. on September 4th, and at the close of 1882, it was lighting 225 houses wide for about 5,000 lamps. This epochal story will be told in next chapter. The most interesting are the bulletin notes from England, especially in regard to the brilliant exhibition given by Mr. E. H. Johnson at the Crystal Palace, Sydenham, visited by the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, twice by the Dukes of Westminster and Sutherland, by 300 members of the Gas Institute, and by innumerable delegations from cities, boroughs, etc. Describing this before the Royal Society of Arts, Sir W. H. Pearce, F.R.S., remarked, "Many unkind things have been said of Mr. Edison and his promises. Perhaps no one has been severer in this direction than myself. It is some gratification for me to announce my belief that he has at last solved the problem he set himself to solve, and to be able to describe to the Society the way in which he has solved it." Before the exhibition closed, it was visited by the Prince and Princess of Wales, now the deceased Edward VII, and the Dowager Queen Alexandra, and the princesses received from Mr. Johnson as a souvenir a tiny electric chandelier fashioned like a banquet of fern leaves and flowers, the butts being some of the first miniature incandescent lamps ever made. The first item in the first bulletin board dealt with the fire question, and all through the successive issues runs a series of significant items on the same subject. Many of them are aimed at gas, and there are several green summaries of death and fires due to gas leakers' exploitation. A tendency existed at the time to assume that electricity was altogether safe, while its opponents, predicting their attacks on arc lighting casualties, insisted it was most dangerous. Edison's problem educating the public was rather difficult, for while his low-pressure, direct current system has always been absolutely without danger to life, there has also been the undeniable fact that escaping electricity might cause a fire just as a leaky water pipe can flood a house. The important question had arisen, therefore, of certifying the fire underwriters as to the safety of this system. He had foreseen that there would be an absolute necessity for special devices to prevent fires from occurring by reason of any excessive current flowing in any circuits, and several of his earliest detailed lightning inventions deal with this subject. The insurance underwriters of New York and other parts of the country gave a great deal of time and study to the question through their most expert representatives, with the aid of Edison and his associates. Other electric light companies are cooperating, and the knowledge of thus gained was embodied in insurance rules to govern wiring for electric lighting, formulated during the later part of 1881, adopted by the New York Board of Fire Underwriters January 12, 1882, and subsequently endorsed by the other boards in the various insurance districts. Under temporary rulings, however, a vast amount of work had already been done, but it was obviously that the industry grew there would be less and less possibility of supervision except through such regulations insisting upon the use of the best devices and methods. Indeed, the direct superintendence soon became unnecessary, owing to the increasing knowledge and greater skill acquired by the installing staff, and this system of education was notably improved by a manual written by Mr. Edison himself. Copies of this brochure are as scarce today as first folio Shakespeare's, and common prices equal to those of the other American first editions. The little book is the only known incursion of its authors into literature, if we accept the brief articles he has written for technical papers and for the magazines. It contained what was at once a full, elaborate, and terse explanation of a complete isolated plant, with diagrams of various methods of connection and operation, and a carefully detailed description of every individual part, its function, its characteristics. The remarkable success of those early years was indeed only achieved by following up with the Chinese exactness the minute and intimate methods insisted upon by Edison as to the use of the apparatus and devices employed. It was a curious example of establishing standard practice while changing with kaleidoscopic rapidity all the elements involved. He was true to ideal as to the polar star, but was incessantly making improvements in every direction. With an ironclasm that has often seemed ruthless and brutal, he did not hesitate to sacrifice older devices the moment a new one came in sight that embodied real advance in securing effective results. The process is periodic but costly. Nobody ever had a bigger scrap heap than Edison. But who dare proclaim the process intrinsically wasteful if the losses occur in the initial stages, and economies in all the later ones? With Edison in this introduction of his lighting system, the method was ruthless but not reckless. At an early stage of commercial development, a standardizing committee was formed, consisting of the heads of all the departments, and this body was instructed in the task of testing and criticizing all existing and proposed devices, as well as of considering the suggestions and complaints of workmen offered from time to time. This procedure was fruitful in two principal results: the education of the whole executive force in the technical details of the system, and a constant improvement in the quality of the Edison installations, both contributing to the rapid growth of the industry. For many years, Gower Street played an important part in Edison fairs, being the center of all its manufacture of heavy machinery. But it was not in a desirable neighborhood, and owing to the rapid growth of the business soon became disadvantageous for other reasons. Edison tells of his frequent visits to the shops at night with the escort of James Russell, a well-known detective who knew all the denizens of the places. We used to go out at night to a little low place, an old lighthouse, 8 feet wide and 20 feet long, where we got a lunch at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. It was the toughest kind of restaurant ever seen. For the clam chowder they used to sing 4 clams during the whole season, and the average number of flies per pie was 7. That was by actual count. As to the shops in the locality, the street was lined with rather old buildings and poor tenements. We had no much frontage. As our business increased enormously, our quarters became too small, so we saw the district terminator and asked him if we could not store castings and other things on the sidewalk. He gave us permission, told us to go ahead, and he would see it was all right. The only thing he required for this was that when the man was sent with a note from him asking us to give him a job, he has to be put on. We had a hand laborer foreman, Big Jim, a very powerful Irishman. who could lift above half a ton. When one of the Tammy aspirants appeared, he was told to go right to work at $1.5 per day. Next day he was told to off to lift a certain piece, and if the man could not lift, he was discharged. That made the Tammy men all safe. Jim could pick the piece up easily. The other man could not, and so we let him out. Finally, the Tammy leader caught a hot, as we were running a big engine lift out on the sidewalk, and he was afraid that we were carrying it a little too far. The lifts were worked right out in the street and belted through the windows for the shop. At last it became necessary to move from Gower Street, and Mr. Edison gives a very interesting account of the incident in connection with the transfer of the plant to Schenectady, New York. After our works at Gower Street got too small, we had labor troubles also. It seems I had rather a socialistic strain in me, and I raised the pay of the workmen 25 cents an hour above the prevailing rates of wages. Whereupon Hoy and Company, our new neighbors, complained at our doing this. I said I thought it was all right, but the men, having got a little more wages, thought they would try coercion and get a little more, as we were considered soft marks. Whereupon this struck at that time that was critical. However, we were short of money for payrolls, and we concluded it might not be so bad after all, and it would give us a couple of weeks to catch up. So when the workmen went out, they appointed a committee to meet us. But for 2 weeks they could not find us, so became somewhat more anxious than we were. Finally, they said they would like to go back. We said all right, and back they went. It was quite a novelty to the men not to be able to find us when they wanted to, and they didn't relish it at all. What with these troubles and lack of room, we decided to find a factory elsewhere, and decided to try the locomotive works at Schenectady. It seems that the people there had had a falling out among themselves, and one of the directors had started opposition works, but before he had completed all the buildings and putting machinery, some compromise was made, and the works were for sale. We bought them very reasonably and moved everything there. These works were owned by me and my assistant until sold to Edison General Electric Company. At one time we employed several thousand men, and since then the work has been greatly expanded. At these new works, our orders were far in excess of our capital to handle the business, and both Mr. Ingersoll and I were afraid we might get into trouble for lack of money. Mr. Ingersoll was then my business manager, running the whole thing, and therefore, when Mr. Henry Villard and his syndicate offered to buy us out, we concluded it was better to be sure than to be sorry, so we sold out for a large sum. Villard was a very aggressive man with big ideas, so I could never quite understand him. He had no sense of humor. I remember one time we were going out to the Hudson River boating to inspect the works, and with us was Mr. Henderson, our chief engineer, who was certainly the best raconteur of funny stories I ever known. We sat at the tail end of the boat, and he started in to tell funny stories. Villard could not see a single point, and scarcely laugh at all, and Henderson became so disconcerted he had to give it up. It was the same way with gold. In the early telegraph days, I remember going with him to see Mackay, and the Impecunious country editor. It was very funny, full of amusing and absurd situation, but God never smiled once. The formation of the Edison General Electric Company involved the consolidation of the immediate Edison manufacturing interest in electric light and power, with a capitalization of $12 million. Now a relatively modest sum, but in those days the amount was large, and the combination caused a great deal of newspaper comment as to such a coinage of brain power. Next step came with the creation of the great General Electric Company of today, a combination of the Edison, Thomson, and Bruce Lightning interest in the manufacture, which to this day maintains the ever-growing plants at Harrison, Lane, Schenectady, and there employs from 20 to 25,000 people. End of chapter 15. Recording by Nellie, Xi'an, China.